Shalom. Welcome back to Light of the Nations. We've been talking about the cycle of tragedy, cycle of mourning from Tammuz to Av, the concept of mourning for the Holy Temple, and specifically in the light of that mysterious verse in Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 14, and the comments made by the great Maimonides regarding this elusive cult of the mythological Tammuz, weeping over the Tammuz. And quoting from the Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, since I don't have whatever works the Rambam consulted at my fingertips, I begin to see that there is a concept, a very ancient concept of a ritual mourning that was held over this story that was extremely widespread. It began in the ancient world. It was peopled by members of the Babylonian pantheon of gods. This was transferred to Greek mythology. The Babylonian presentation was the precursor of the more modern Greek tragedy, but there is an ancient idea here of the female goddess Ishtar and her lover, him having met with premature death, her having to descend into the netherworld to retrieve him, however, and the effect that this whole drama had on life on earth. And again, the fact that this is cyclical, that this takes place every year. Consulting with another important anthropological work, The Golden Bough of Sir James George Frazer, considered to be one of the most influential works of the 20th century. I'm not giving my rabbinical approbation for everything that's written here, but first published in 1890, The Golden Bough was eventually issued in a 12-volume edition, which was abridged in 1922 by the author and his wife. This has been considered to be one of the most important works of anthropology of all time. It's a study in mythology, magic, and religion, and this would be a good place to look for information about this cult of Tammuz that Maimonides was acquainted with, that the prophet Ezekiel seems to refer to. And here we read that, again, in the religious literature of Babylonia, Tammuz appears as the youthful spouse or lover of Ishtar, the great mother goddess, embodiment of the reproductive energies of nature. The references to their connection with each other in myth and ritual are both fragmentary and obscure, but we gather from them that every year Tammuz was believed to die, passing away from the cheerful earth to the gloomy subterranean world, and that every year his divine mistress journeyed in quest of him to the land from which there is no returning, to the house of darkness, where dust lies on door and bolt. During her absence, the passion of love ceased to operate. Men and beasts alike forgot to reproduce their kinds. All life was threatened with extinction. In other words, winter. Spring, she comes up again. He goes further, Sir Frazer, in The Golden Bough, and he has some really incredible details here. He talks about the laments for the departed Tammuz that are contained in several extant Babylonian hymns, which liken him to plants that quickly fade. And again, since this is not Idolatry 101, and I don't want you to walk away from this lesson more enthused about Tammuz than you are about the Holy Temple, so I don't want to tell you too much detail about this. But this is really amazing. There are actually dirges, extant Babylonian dirges, inscribed, Lament of the Flutes for Tammuz. His death appears to have been annually mourned to the shrill music of flutes by women about midsummer in the month named after him, the month of Tammuz. And the dirges are listed here. It's a tragic story. These are melancholy rites. And again, this was later interpolated onto Aphrodite and Adonis, and essentially what we see from here is that Maimonides was aware of a very ancient cult, which is being alluded to here in the book of Ezekiel. And this cult, which is essentially expressed through ritual mourning, is a cyclical, communal mourning and lament over a story that was used to explain the natural phenomena of the cycle of life, which in itself, the cycle of life can be something that people become very despondent over and very stuck in and very much in need of an explanation. It's interesting to note that in Greek theater, the theater of ancient Greece, ancient Greek drama, this was a culture. This was a theatrical culture that actually was originally, it was institutionalized, it was originally part of, again, a festival which honored a god, the god Dionysus. And the whole genre of Greek tragedy actually originated as a religious cult. It was linked to the practices of these ancient Dionysian cults. Indeed, early Greek religion was interrelated with this concept of tragedy. So, in a word, in Babylonia, which our verse is referring to, this concept of ritual mourning, it was established, the month of Tammuz itself established in honor of this god Tammuz, and involving the entire story of the consorts of Ishtar. In this cult practice, as we can see, the dead Tammuz eventually widely mourned in much of the ancient Near East. And as we can see, these mourning practices, which actually included these portrayals, these theatrical portrayals, became so popular that apparently, as Ezekiel was shown, they were actually performed at the very entrance to the temple, while the temple, the first temple, was yet standing. How amazing, how interesting, how ironic. What is the message here? The Tammuz itself, for the Jewish people, is known as a time of tears, tears for the Holy Temple, hopefully the constructive tears. But we see that there is a cycle that we are involved with ourselves, the cycle from year to year, much as the cycle that was observed and lamented over by the ancient pagans. There is a cycle from year to year that seems to bring us back to the same place. Now that might sound sacrilegious to some or too challenging to others. How could I say that it brings us back to the same place? Well, because it's true. It's a fact. If it wasn't a fact, then we would have rebuilt the temple by now. So, are we satisfied? God forbid, as a people, on perhaps a subliminal level, through no fault of our own, are we satisfied with the mourning itself? Has that become an end instead of a means to an end? Instead of realizing that we are to be motivated to rise up, have we become caught up in a cult of tragedy? And is this possibly a level of understanding of the critique, of the criticism, of the insight that Ezekiel was shown? There is a natural human propensity towards being caught up in a cycle. And it's the cycle of life. And we need a comfort zone in order to deal with the inevitable. The changing seasons are as inevitable as life and death. And the ancient pagan mindset, in order to deal with this whole drama, which is the stuff of life, invented this whole mythological representation in order to feel comfortable. What it became, though, it became clearly a cult wherein life itself is celebrated as a tragedy. And that's why one aspect of the crocodile tears of Tammuz is this aspect of this, and we see this so much, it's so much a part of our culture, it's a part of Western culture, it's a part of American culture, this obsession with nostalgia, with the pain of a fallen hero, and that's what Tammuz is all about, with this idea of just being stuck in our pain, what I call romanticizing our pain, being so comfortable with this pain because it is what we are expecting and what we are used to dealing with. And I think that all of this is reflected, I think Maimonides, in his tremendous wisdom, was actually alluding to this very problem, the idea that we can also become stuck in a place wherein we are so part of this cycle that there's no way out of it. And how ironic that the very idea of Tammuz, which is specifically an idea of confronting idolatrous forces, including those forces within our own psyche that hold us back from our spiritual fulfillment and from connecting to Hashem and from rebuilding the temple. How ironic that this time, it's almost like parts of the Jewish mindset have been taken over. We have interpolated onto them this pagan Gentile mindset of weeping over the Tammuz. And that's exactly what the verse in Ezekiel 8:14 is telling us. Weeping over our lives, the tragic aspect of our lives, because it feels so good to have that self-pity, and we're so able to deal with that, and so we'll do it again next year. And we'll do it again next year. Better the devil you know. So we become part of this cycle. And you know what the whole irony is? The whole irony is that this is actually a perversion of the very concept of time and what time has to offer. And if we would understand this, we would be able to break out of this cycle. Because the pagan conception of time is indeed cyclical. Winter and spring, summer and fall, life and death. And to be caught in that circle, one can begin to feel despondent and hopeless. And that's why they had to invent this whole idea of this tragedy that they could all identify with and weep over, because it's so sad. Isn't it so sad? And wasn't he great? And so it becomes a cycle wherein one is held back from escaping. But the Jewish concept of time, and we've spoken about this so many times together, and there's no limit to how much we have to understand this. The Jewish concept of time is linear, so that the holidays that come around, the seasons that change and come back to a point in cyclical fashion, are offering us an opportunity for rededication and for tikkun, and for escaping from the cycle by going straight. We're not going back. We're not just moving in a spiral. We're going further along. And this is so amazing. It's a combination of the linear idea of going straight ahead, plus the opportunity that time is presenting us to forge a change. And it's so much easier to get caught in some sort of repetition wherein the very feeling of tragedy and hopelessness becomes something almost to celebrate, as it is in the case of the women who are crying over the Tammuz. It's so much more comforting and safe to know that we'll be crying again next year over something which is totally out of our hands. But that verse in Zechariah, that is so beautiful, that tells us that the fasts are going to be transformed into days of gladness. How is that ever going to happen? So, when we take another look at the verses, so we take another look at the verses. Thus said Hashem, Master of Legions, the fast of the 4th, the fast of the 5th, the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th will be to the house of Judah for joy and for gladness and for happy festivals. Love, truth, and peace, the verse concludes. Love, truth, and peace. What are those words? How is that a continuation? What is the connection between those beautiful words, V'ha'emet, V'ha'shalom, Ehavu, and truth and peace, love? The prophet is telling us clearly this is the secret to how the fast days, the cycle of pain, the cycle of mourning, will be transformed into days of gladness, for us to understand that their purpose is not to keep us in a rut, to keep us in a cycle of never-ending pain, but love, peace, and truth, meaning the truth of the Torah, to confront our inadequacies, to confront and to instruct these places that hold us back, these aspects of Tammuz within our personality. The secret to the transformation of the fast days into days of gladness is our love of Hashem's peace and truth, which is the love of His presence, of the one reality, of our destiny, of our purpose in this world, to transform the hideous, self-pitying aspects of Tammuz within ourselves into joy and gladness by realizing that our purpose in this world is not to be stuck in a cycle, not to mourn, not to cry over the past, not to be obsessive about something and feel that it's something that we can't change, but to realize that our aspiration is to rebuild, to rise up, to change the cycle, to see to it that the days are transformed. And this is really the secret of the Torah's concept of time, the secret of the Torah's experience for all humanity, to take this world and to transform it into a place of the divine presence, to rid it of the frailty and the insecurity and the false feeling of vulnerability, which is represented by that ancient pagan cult of Tammuz, the celebration of death, the tragedy of life, the cult of seeing life in the negative as a tragedy, and to enjoy that tragedy because it feels so comfortable and so good, for us to rise above that and become true servants of Hashem, who is life, who is eternal life, the Shekhinah. And that is the secret of the Holy Temple and the secret of this period of time now. From Tammuz to Av, the period of transformation is for us to realize that this can be our opportunity for the rebuilding of the Holy Temple.